vast numbers of financial institutions from London and around the world have been trooping to its doors, trying to get a piece of that action. And one of the ways in which they have been doing that is trying to make contact with Saif al-Islam or his friends, because they believe that he is one of the gatekeepers for that fund.
At the LSE, the students are upset about the ties between their university and the son of a dictator. But there are many others now wondering if it was such a good idea to do business with Saif al-Islam.
Barnaby Phillips reporting for us there. Thousands of expatriate workers are fleeing Libya as that country's economy comes to a standstill amid the unrest. Now, Turkey often sees itself as a bridge between East and West. In the past decade, Ankara has struck deals worth billions of dollars in the oil and construction industry across the Middle East and North Africa. It has more than 20,000 citizens working in Libya, and as with other nations, it is struggling to get its workers out. Anita McNaught has more now from Istanbul.
Exhausted, relieved and safely on their way home aboard a Turkish ferry, some of the 3,000 Turks who'd taken refuge for days at a sports stadium in Benghazi. More than 25,000 Turks are working in Libya. So far, only 6,000 have got out, many with harrowing tales.
Soldiers came from Africa and they clashed with people right away. Many died. Thank God, no Turkish nationals were hurt, but our construction sites were looted.
But Turks have become casualties, the foreign minister confirming one Turk died and acknowledging reports of scuffles. Relations with Libya have never been exactly smooth, but Turkey's $15 billion worth of investments in the country, mostly in construction projects, have kept up a cordial front and muzzled Turkey's outspoken prime minister, who up till now has said little more to Muammar Gaddafi than listen to the voice of your people.
For every country, it's a difficult balancing act to balance your interests and values.
But Prime Minister Erdogan was criticised, even mocked in Turkey, for accepting the Gaddafi Prize for Human Rights in November last year. It came with $250,000 US. Many are now asking when he's going to give it back.
Erdogan's acceptance of the Gaddafi Human Rights Prize was not the proper thing to do. But on the other hand, I think it is only natural that Turkey tries to, get as much economic interest as possible out of Libya.
What's clear is that while there are still at least 20,000 Turks in Libya, whatever the Turkish government really thinks, it's not saying in public until all its people are out of danger. Turkey is one of several countries the Gaddafi regime has accused of being behind the uprising in Libya. Information coming from Turks trapped on the ground tells a rather different story of ordinary Libyans protecting Turkish workers and their families from the violence raging around them.
All this unrest in the Middle East started in Tunisia. Since Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was ousted as president in mid-January, oil prices have broken the $100 a barrel mark and are set to keep rising. The biggest fear is that unrest could spread to the world's biggest exporter of oil. Saudi King Abdullah has promised financial aid worth $36 billion to avert any kind of popular unrest. Public employees will get a 15% pay rise, debtors will get relief, and there is also help for students. Announcement as he returned home after spending 3 months abroad for medical treatment. The new funds will also help struggling Saudis buy homes, get married and start businesses. Well, the revolt in Saudi Arabia could spark an oil price shock with prices of more than $150 a barrel. In fact, investment bank Nomura Holdings believes if political unrest halts exports from Libya and Algeria, oil prices could hit $220 a barrel. Million barrels. And that's important because that would be a similar level seen during the Gulf War when prices hit a record $147 a barrel in 2008. Since the departure by almost $15. Well, the real fear is that this could spark inflationary pressures, possibly causing a double-dip recession. Well, joining me now to talk more about this from London is Neil Atkinson. He's the Energy Director at Business Analyst Data Monitor. Neil, thanks for being with us. Now, if I could start with this prediction from Nomura Holdings, could things really hit $220 a barrel?
Well, I think that's a fantasy figure which almost belongs in the realms of guesswork. A parallel to the situation we have today. If of course all of Libyan production were to be shut down, and it looks to be only a matter of time before it actually is, and if all of Algerian production were to be shut down, which is a rather more speculative judgment, that takes out about 4 million barrels a day or so. We are in a different position in 2011 than we were in 2008. Back in 2008, when there were difficulties over production or rumours of difficulties over production, there was very, very little spare production capacity anywhere in the world. Today, in 2011, we have spare production capacity in Saudi Arabia, we have spare production capacity elsewhere in OPEC, and crucially, we have hundreds of millions of barrels of strategic stocks under the control of Western governments run by the International Energy Agency. So I don't think we're in a situation yet where we can really sensibly call a $220 a barrel oil price.
Well, let's just take this scenario a little bit further then, if we can. If the unrest spreads to Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest oil exporter, what are the prospects for oil prices there? Does that mean all bets are pretty much off?
Oh, all bets are off. We've never had that situation before, and if you lose 6-7 million barrels a day from world oil markets, economies in the Far East, the United States and other countries would see a major disruption to their economies. The price rise, it would be impossible in those circumstances to speculate where the price could go. So it could well be that Nomura's $220 barrel figure, which they were positing as a possible consequence of the loss of oil from Libya and Algeria, that could then come into play. But it's completely uncharted territory.
We mentioned earlier the $36 billion in economic aid to help the Saudi people. Is that perhaps an attempt to avert a nightmare scenario like that?
Oh, it's a very, very clear sign that the Saudi authorities are concerned about the threat of contagion coming into their country. And these steps, a 15% pay rise and various other measures that you outlined earlier on are a sign to that they wish to meet any demands that may be placed upon them. But I suspect that a package even as apparently generous as this, it takes time for it to be actually implemented. It takes time for the money to work its way through the system. So it may well be that the package, attractive though it is, isn't actually enough to prevent a contagion if it's going to happen.
So how is all of this going to affect Europe's energy security? Because Europe's been down this road before with the gas dispute between Russia and Ukraine a few years back. That did affect supplies for a while. Are they in a position where they're able to deal with these kind of situations?
Well, under the auspices of the International Energy Agency, all governments in Europe and indeed further afield are required to hold a set level of oil stocks in reserve to deal precisely with this kind of emergency. So I would imagine, and indeed there was a public statement from the International Energy Agency earlier this week, that they would be prepared to release emergency stocks if necessary. The problem with that is that, of course, a barrel of oil here is not the same as a barrel of oil there. And it isn't just a question of sending along a barrel to replace a lost barrel, but because of differences in quality. And there are obviously logistical issues to be considered as well. But as a measure to deal with a shut-off of supplies from Libya and possibly Algeria, there are emergency stocks which are held for precisely this purpose.
So what's going to be the impact of all of this on the world economy? Are we looking at another double-dip recession?
I think we could be if prices were to escalate up through $120 towards $150 a barrel, the kind of levels we saw in 2008. The world economy is emerging from recession, there's little doubt about that, but the recovery is fairly sluggish, it's fairly fragile, And I believe that were we to see oil prices escalate to scary levels, then it could well be that the recovery is halted in its tracks and could even, as you say, dip back into recession. Oil prices affect everybody, not just the Western economies emerging from recession, but they also affect likely levels of growth in emerging economies in Asia and elsewhere around the world who find that their energy is costing them more. So higher prices or prices escalating very quickly are bad news for everybody.
All right, Neil Atkinson, many thanks for your time. Just before we go, we want to let you know that you can check us out online anytime. Just start at aljazeera.net/English. Hit the business tab at the top and follow the links to Counting the Cost page for episodes in full and special web-only content. And then when you want to get in touch, look for @AJCountingCost on Twitter. It's the best way to get in touch, share your thoughts and follow developments on the show. And that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Hazem Seeker from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.
Business Latest is brought to you by Catalum, the most efficient and environmentally friendly aluminium smelter. Business Latest is brought to you by Catalum, the most efficient and environmentally friendly aluminium smelter.
As geeks take on dictators, bloggers turn dissidents, and social networks root for social justice, governments are going cyber, spying on their citizens, erecting firewalls like Iron Curtains, and closing down websites. We ask, is cyber-generated change virtual or real? Empire at this time on Al Jazeera.
Unpopular with some at home, untested overseas. The first year has not been easy for David Cameron and his coalition government. In conjunction with U2, Al Jazeera asks your questions to the British Prime Minister. World View, an interview with David Cameron at this time on Al Jazeera.
14 competing teams, 13 different venues, 3 host nations. Cricket is part of the fabric of life here, and this competition is the pinnacle of the one-day game. We'll be bringing you all the action and reaction from India, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. The Cricket World Cup on Al Jazeera.